Somebody pointed out that I hadn't tested the definitions against the rules, and since all of those definitions that I developed pass all the tests, I thought I would give you some exercises that we could go over here for ones that may or may not pass all the rules. So let's just get used to the rules by looking at this. A triangle is a closed plane figure with 3 equal sides. Rule of scope violated. It doesn't have to have 3 equal sides, right? So it's too narrow in the vernacular of the rules of definition. The concept includes things that definition leaves out, like scalene and isosceles triangles. That's equilateral triangle, is that. A cause is an aspect of an entity's nature. Now, some of these may be right, okay? A cause is an aspect of an entity's nature that explains its action. Okay, well, we got, it's short enough. I usually go right away to the unit economy rule, because if it's too long, there's no point in going through the rest of the rules. It passes that one. It has a genus and a differentia. It makes reference to reality, apparently. It doesn't seem to me to be too broad or too narrow. I couldn't imagine an issue more fundamental than the level it's dealing with. So maybe that one passes. All who think it does pass, raise your hand. Gotcha. No, it's circular. Explain means to state the cause. So it says a cause is an aspect of an entity's nature that gives the cause of its action. No. So it doesn't satisfy the rule of reference. It does not make reference to reality. It does not advance your knowledge. It seems to. And there are many things you could put in there that would also do the same wrong thing, like it's an aspect of an entity's nature that produces its action, that its action is based upon, that its action stems from. All those are synonyms for cause. I'm working on a definition of cause. There is none in the literature. In fact, Ayn Rand was asked that in one of the workshops, and she was hard-pressed. She didn't have one. She had a definition of the law of causality, but not of the term cause in particular. The president, meaning of the United States, is the government official who appoints the Secretary of State. And what rule does that violate? Yeah, fundamentality. He appoints the Secretary of State and a lot of other people because he heads the executive branch. And the cabinet positions are under the executive branch. A chair is an item of furniture used for the purpose of sitting. It's not quite grammatically well expressed, but a chair is an item of furniture, that's the right genus, used for the purpose of sitting. That is correct. But what is missing, go ahead. Yeah, but it's not used for the purpose of sitting. A couch, yeah. A couch is also used for the purpose of sitting. So it's too broad. It has to distinguish. A chair is for one person sitting, and you need to give, this is one of those cases where a little bit more than a genus and differentia is called for. Flat level surface with a back. And that the back is necessary to distinguish it from a stool, yeah. So a back is essential, and you need to, in effect, draw a little verbal picture because this is a household object, and a person, if he doesn't know what it is, needs to know what it looks like. Murder is the act of killing an innocent human being. Too wide. to I, just like the preceding one. This is a common failing. That's why I had several examples of that. It's too broad. A car accident that kills an innocent human being is not murder. Murder is a deliberate, malicious act of killing. Even manslaughter doesn't count as murder. It has to be a wrongful, deliberate, intentional killing of an innocent human being. The price of the good is the sum per unit of the seller's cost and his profit. Now remember, I told you some of these could be okay. The price of a good is the sum per unit of the seller's cost and his profit. So that one is wrong. It's wrong. Profit is defined as the difference between selling price and cost. So you can't define price in terms of profit, which is a derivative of price. So the price of a good is the sum paid per unit for owner to get transferred ownership, to take ownership of the good. So it's much simpler. Profit is the one that's a little complicated. Profit is the difference per unit of the selling price and the cost. A lie is a locution deliberately antithetical to a fact known to the speaker. Not crow-friendly. Now, I tried to make this a little more difficult. The original one was something about a lie is a locution from a logic textbook. A lie is a locution deliberately antithetical to a verity, something by the speaker. No, a lie is, what is it that's kind of close to this? Yeah, it's a statement, doesn't be a locution. And rather than saying it's antithetical to a fact known, we could just say it's false. So it's a deliberately stated falsehood, but that won't do it. See, once you get over the crow, that's why I start with the crow. If you then try and simplify it as a lie is a deliberately false statement made by someone, that's not quite right. Let me prove that to you. 2 and 2 is 5. I just made a statement deliberately false. I didn't lie to you. So what is a lie? It's the intent to deceive. It's a statement made with the intent to deceive. Inflation is an economic, now we get to some interesting ones. And inflation is an economic condition characterized by a general rise in prices. Now remember, I told you some of these might be correct. Oh, you're not falling for that anymore? This is wrong, 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 wrong. And you have to fight to the end to get rid of this. You can use the term, I have compromised to this extent. I say price inflation is a general rise. But inflation is an expansion of the fiat money supply. It may or may not lead to a rise in prices. And Ayn Rand was asked, what if the government expands the money supply in line with the expansion of production? Is that inflation? And she said, of course. Now, if a free market's money supply expands in line with the growth of production, that isn't inflation. It has to be fiat money. It has to be an arbitrary political decision to expand the money supply, uncoupled with the facts of reality. So it's an expansion of the money supply for non-economic reasons by fiat currency by force. And that could be characterized by a rise in prices. Generally, 99 times out of 100, it will result in a rise in prices because they do it to such an extent. But it's consistent with prices even falling. If production expands faster than the fiat money does, the price level would fall, but it's still inflation. It's still subjective, phony money added into the system. So that is a non-fundamental. characteristic of those. Consciousness is an organism's awareness of reality. Short and sweet. Remember, I told you some of these might be right. What is the rule that's violated? Yes, in the back. Right on. Awareness and consciousness are synonyms. You cannot define an axiomatic concept. What would you define it in terms of? You've gotten to rock bottom. Now, let me give you an axiomatic concept you don't know about. It'd be interesting. Action. I mean, you know the concept, but you didn't know it was an axiomatic concept. It's not a primary axiom, but it's an irreducible primary at the base of all your knowledge, so it's an axiomatic concept. How would you define action? Now, action, you can define it because you go to the word change. So I mean by action something that happens, a change. I'm using the two synonymously. How would you define change? You can't. It's this. Position of my hand is changing. This is an action of changing the position of my hand. That's all you can do. So you can't define axiomatic concepts, and this attempts to give a definition. You can only define axiomatic concepts or any primary ostensibly by giving an example. You can't define it in terms of some more basic categories. There isn't any more basic category by definition. Oh, somebody asked me, is it ever right to say by definition? I said no. So it's inherent in what you're dealing with that you can't break it down into anything more basic because what you've identified is the most basic fact. Parallel lines. I gave a lecture in 1987 conference on this, 85. Parallel lines are straight lines which do not intersect no matter how far extended. We were taught that, right? There's another way of putting it, but what's wrong with that? Same thing that's wrong with any sophisticated but bad definition, non-essential, non-fundamental. Why do the lines not meet no matter how far they're extended? Because they remain a constant distance apart or because they're headed in the same direction. At first I thought the parallel lines are lines that are equidistant everywhere. Then I realized that no, the more fundamental thing even than that is the direction of a line. A line is extension in a direction, and parallel lines have the same direction. Okay, so you see you get into substantive issues with the last three, then that's why they're in there. And you can test against the rules, and you need to. And I assigned rationalization. This would be another fun thing to go over. Anybody want to venture his or her definition of rationalization? Yeah.
A rationalization is an evasion by means of an incorrect justification.
I'm glad you said that. That's close, but no cigar. First of all, it's not an evasion. It's like an evasion. But an evasion is a volitional process. Rationalization is an automatic process. If you stick with the rationalization, that's an evasion. But a rationalization is a defense mechanism that throws stuff up. Let's get some examples, because that's the first thing to do. It's all right to have that pie. It's the weekend. I don't have to give you the context, right? As a victim of society, I have a right to shoplift. I'm not to blame because free will doesn't exist. A man couldn't be expected to be in top form when he had a cold. Who said that? James Taggart, yeah. When he goes into the 5 and 10 cent store and meets Cheryl, he's going to get Kleenex. It's not called Kleenex, a tissue. And he's in a bad mood. Okay, I won't go through the whole novel. But these are rationalizations. And you said it's an evasion. If you hold on to it in the face of a kind of sneaky realization that no, this doesn't hold up, then it would be evasion. But per se, it's not. And the second part you said was, what was the second part of that, which was also close?
By means of an incorrect justification.
Incorrect. Well, this is like the lie is a false statement. The lie is an attempt, I can make a false statement now. I'm in New York City right now, and that's not a lie. I could have an incorrect justification. Is that what you said? Yeah. I could have an incorrect justification and sincerely believe that it was correct. I just got it wrong. But you're close. That's pretty good. Let's go to what facts give rise to the existence of rationalization. Free will. If there were no free will, there'd be no such thing as rationalization. It's a certain use of free will. Honesty versus dishonesty. And rationality versus emotionalism. Now, you know what emotionalism is. Going by emotions, placing emotions above reason. So the genus, I'm sorry, I have nearest relatives. And this is interesting. My first thoughts about what are the nearest relatives of rationalization were wrong. So I thought the nearest relative would be something like the check is in the mail, when it isn't. And flattery, either to give flattery, or to receive it and delight in it, right? Flattery being insincere, unmeant, faked, phony praise to appeal to someone's vanity. Okay, so the genus of rationalization, which is what all these things have in common, I said was deception, just like with the lie. It's a form of deception. Now, it's not evasion because the deception may be non-volitional, and that's where the distinction between free will and non-free will comes in. So what's a differentiation? Well, first, it can be of yourself. My first idea of the differential was self-deception for rationalization. When you say, it's all right to have that pints a week, and when that thought occurs to you, it's deceiving yourself. But you can rationalize for others. You know, why were you late with that paper? Oh, the dog ate it and I had to redo it. Now, this is what is interesting. You're deceiving yourself or others about what's rationally justified. It's a kind of meta-level thing. Phony justifications manufactured to make emotionalism look like reason, look enough like reason that one can indulge in it. It's too long, but every attempt I made to shorten it so far didn't work well. The point is that you tell someone else or yourself, it's all right to have that pie, it's the weekend, hoping that that will let you eat the pie, right? Whereas if what came to you was, it's all right to eat that pie, I'm not on a diet. What I weigh is fine right now. Now, the context, obviously, is you've decided, I'm not going to have any more desserts, I'm overweight, I'm on a diet, right? So you couldn't do it if you kind of flat out stated a falsehood to yourself that you knew was false. But this one is like plausible enough, your subconscious hopes that you'll buy this. You know, it's an offer, and if that doesn't work, something else may occur to you. So they are phony reasons, phony justifications that you're Subconscious produces because it's driven by an emotion. Essential is it's an emotion-driven explanation. And I tried to work that phrase in and wasn't able to do it grammatically, but it's an emotion-driven. Now, as such, I want to be clear once more. What your emotions drive your subconscious to send up to your conscious mind, if I can use that dangerous spatial metaphor, is not under your control, not under your direct volitional control. Your volitional control is, should I really have that piece of pie? When you hear, oh, but it's a weekend. You didn't choose to have that thought. It came to you. Your volition concerns, are you willing to challenge that thought? That's where your volition comes in. A good person will pause and say, that doesn't smell right. Well, I shouldn't say a good person. A good choice in that moment would be to, no, that doesn't, let me look again, let me ask again, holding more context. The wrong thing to do is to say, okay. And you know when people rationalize, they get a little smile. It's okay, it's a weekend. Now, sometimes if it's more serious, it can be petulant. As a victim of society, I have a right to shoplift. But, you know, you can tell they don't believe it. And you can't lie to yourself without some bad odor coming with it because you did it. It's impossible to tell yourself or to hear from yourself something that you know isn't right and not get a funny feeling from it that makes you smile or make you petulant. So the evidence of rationalization is a cognitive signal, which your moral responsibility is to pay attention to. We're wandering from logic. Anyway, that's how I would define rationalization. And we could test it to see the main thing is it too broad or too narrow? Phony justifications to make what's actually emotionalism palatable enough to do it. We could, try some more examples. I think it'll hold up. Even if it doesn't, it's just going to need a little tweaking. So I just worked this out, last night and today. So I'm not saying that this is absolutely correct, but it looks good to me. Ayn Rand defines it in philosophic detection, but she's coming at it from a different, completely consistent with what I said, but she's coming at it from a different direction, so I didn't want to give you her definition. I wanted to work one out of my own. Okay, let's move right along. Fallacies of conceptualization, big new topic, big new topic, that is really new. Pretty big, pretty sizable, but this changed gears. This is something different than that we've covered, but it still pertains to concepts. Concrete boundedness, floating abstractions, I should separate them. Concrete boundedness is non-conceptualization. It's not really a fallacy of conceptualization. Concrete boundedness means you don't apply the conceptual knowledge you have. You're staring at the concrete, and you're not integrating to a wider context. And we have one famous example of that in objectivism. It was the guy who talked to an objectivist about controls on the steel industry, and after a long discussion, he's got it. Yeah, so I see. So the control violates the rights of the steel company owners, and it lowers the quality and lowers the productiveness of the economy. And yeah, I get it. And the next thing you want to know, well, it's all right to have controls in the coal industry, isn't it? That's concrete boundedness. It's hard to top that, but it's very widespread because people are trained to be concrete bound now through progressive education. That's why I think objectivism is doing better in foreign countries than in America, because we have had progressive education here longer because John Dewey was an American. Okay, so concrete boundness is simple and it's not, it's just connect things, you say to the person who's, get the principle, and you name it for him or for yourself. Floating abstractions is a aborted conceptualization. It's something a little different. If the abstraction has some meaning and is being used, but what meaning? Hope and change. Hope about what? Change from what to what? Make America great again. Great in what way? In keeping out Chinese products? In protecting Americans from competition at the expense of other Americans who want that lower price good from China? So this goes back a long time. The New Frontier, the New Deal, the Fair Deal, the Great Society, all these things are floating abstraction. But the way that people use freedom, access to medical care, that's actually a package deal. But a floating abstraction can easily be, it's kind of destined to be a package deal. We're going to discuss package deals in a minute. And the remedies, this is what you need to know. The remedies for floating abstractions are examples, concretization through examples, definition, and reduction. And we don't discuss reduction because it's too hard. So just the idea of reduction is you go to the concept below in the hierarchy and then to the concept below that in the hierarchy and continue to get to hand, cup, things that are perceptual. But it's really hard to trace that out on it. I once did, in a course like this, took farmer, and I filled 2 or 3 blackboards with charts of lines going down. It's amazing how complex the apparently simple concepts are. So let's do some concretization. This is selling you again on thinking in examples, but now from the standpoint of preventing floating abstraction. Let me interrupt myself just to make a procedural point. I happened to look at the catalog, and the way the courses have been organized doesn't match what I claimed they would be in the catalog. The reason the order is different because I realized that there was no point in covering thinking in examples after definition when you needed examples to do definition. So I moved the part about thinking in examples to real early before we did definition, and that is responsible for the change you see from the announced. But nobody cares about that, right? So, but let's concretize now to prevent a floating abstraction, collectivism, and, even we who know what collectivism is, sort of, it tends to float. If it's tied, if your concretes under collectivism are Nazism and communism, racial collectivism, economic collectivism, that's it. There's much more to learn, and you'll see that coming up. Conscription. Conscription is collectivistic, the draft, the military draft, because the idea the country has a right to defend itself. The country needs to defend itself. You're getting the benefit of living in society. You have to pay your debt. You have to pay your dues to society, and military service is one. We couldn't have a society if we didn't have a military. So you owe it to society. You got help from society. Look at all that you got. You didn't build that, pure collective. But if you take an individualist perspective, you don't get any benefits from society. You get benefits from your parents. But they wanted to give it to you, and they owe it to you once they brought you into existence. You get benefits from your teacher, but they're paid. You get benefits from your grocer, but he's paid. You're not living as a parasite, are you? I hope not. So you don't have any debt to society, and when you think of the individuals who you have interacted with, you paid your way, or your parents paid your way for you at the beginning. So there's no such thing if you look at it from a non-collectivist perspective. Racism is racial collectivism, as we saw last time. Diversity. We need diversity at the university. Diversity of race, but it could be diversity of anything except ideas. It's a collective concept by its nature. We're going to take the statistics of the professors at this university and see which categories they fall into, because the university has to have the right profile. Collectivism. Is every hire that you make a good hire? That's the only question. The answer is not, oh, well, we have 33% Asians, so we can't hire any more Asians. That's a collectivistic we. Feminism. Women are discriminated against. Women have bad role models. Women this and women that. There isn't any entity women. There's this woman and this girl and that girl. And some of them have had some experiences and some have had others. And you can't right the wrongs by treating them as a collective with certain rights and as if they were an entity. It's a form of, it's like racism. Nazism, obviously. There's a famous Nazi statement that's in the Ominous Parallels from a Nazi leader. The only private individual in Germany today is one who is asleep. Every waking hour, they're part of the social unit. Stalin once toasted to the cogs in the collective machinery of the Soviet Union. Here's to the cogs, he toasted. That's according to Solzhenitsyn, he says that. He probably knows. The tribal premise in economics, now we're getting juicy, right? The goods are supplied in scarce quantity. The goods are supplied in scarce quantity to whom? Tribal premise looks at everything in economics from the aggregate viewpoint. It's good to look at aggregates if you remember the aggregates of individuals. So macroeconomics is based on the fallacy of the tribal view that the collective is all, the individual is just a cog in the machine. So this is like the right-wing version of Stalinism. Ethnicity is just mini-racism. Instead of saying black and white, you say Caribbean and versus European or something. You narrow it down. Or it could be kind of cultural rather than racial exactly. But Ayn Rand calls it mini-racism. Family values. Family is the little collective. You know, the conservatives' idea, we've got to defend the family. Family doesn't exist. It's you and your relatives, each of them. God help you. Giving back to the community. I wrote an article for Forbes that said the community should give back to the rich. The 1% are owed big time by the community because they've benefited the community a lot more than the community has benefited them. It's a collective. There is no community. There's the homeless bum on the corner and the self-respecting cleaning lady and the guy who works in advertising. There's all the individual people that exist, and you have the relationships with them that you do. There's no community. This is one of the ones that I particularly hate. You have a civic duty to vote. Doesn't matter who you vote for, get out there and vote. Doesn't matter that you haven't thought about it. Doesn't matter that you don't care. Doesn't matter that you're a fool and a drunk. Get out and vote. We're going to send a bus around to haul you out of the gutter and put you in that voting. Now, part of that is because those people vote leftist, right? The people who can't be bothered to get to the polls and are lying in the gutter drunk are more sympathetic to the idea of a free lunch than a person who's working and earns a salary. But that's not the real explanation, because right-wingers think this too. Yeah, get out and vote. Everyone has the civic duty to get out and vote. The real cause is their belief in the collective consciousness. The more consciousness as we assemble to get this decision made, the more reality will have to snap into line with it. So it's a social primacy of consciousness. We need all these minds getting together to form absolute truth. One person's opinion doesn't mean much. 2 people doesn't mean much. 3 people, well, you're starting to mean a little. But if you get 300 million people, that will do it. Reality ceases to exist and becomes what they want it to be. So we've got to get those minds out there expressing whatever they express, just to form part of the collective consciousness. That's what's behind it. Socialism, obviously, is collectivism. Coalition building is a collectivist idea, and just not to pause too long. Pressure group warfare, where you have to be in a block. You have to gang up with everybody else because the individual has no rights. So you have to jockey for power by forming a pressure group. Consensus, yes, yes. Here we go again. I just am reviewing this. I have it all nicely laid out. And the next one is actually back one, is frozen abstraction. So the term used only once in the entire objectivist literature. But it is a phenomenon, so for completeness, I'm going to cover it. Frozen abstraction is you've conceptualized, you've got some clear examples, you know what it means there, and then you stop. You staple shut the file folder. I've got enough concretes, this is what it is, don't bother me with any new information. The example that Ayn Rand gives when she talks about this is equating morality with altruism. People get the idea of morality from altruism, and that's it. They don't want to hear about any other possibility, right? So the idea that egoism could be another morality, even if it's a wrong morality, right? It's not that they're saying they would have to say egoism is right, but they don't admit the possibility that there could be anything else. And philosophers are the same way almost all the time. Morality equals sacrifice. There's no other theory. If you're just talking about, oh, well, make yourself happy, live your life, flourish, that's not morality. What is that? What's it called? Prudence. That's not morality, because morality is sacrifice. We know that because that's what Mommy told us. So they staple shut the file folder on moral theories, moral codes, and only let in what they're used to. So there's another example, like communism equals Soviet Union, and that prevents them from having to face the reality of other forms of communism that exist in the world. So communism, oh, well, that's done. That's by. That's over. That's in the archives. We don't have to talk about communism anymore because the Soviet Union fell. Cuba, Venezuela, no, we don't talk about that. All right, those are all insufficient, fallacies of insufficient conceptualization. None, too little, or stopped. Okay, now here is misconceptualization, not insufficient, but misconceptualization, invalid concepts. First of all, objectivism is the only philosophy that recognizes invalid concepts. All right, maybe someone somewhere does, but virtually, at least virtually, the only philosophy that has such an idea is invalid concepts. There are 2 categories and causes of invalid concepts. There are no units. There's nothing to conceptualize. or the wrong units. Oh, well, we got lots of those. We got like squircle. It's a square circle. How about, you can't say God because God's a proper name, but the logos. Remember that from Jordan Peterson? The logos. Ghost, unicorn, gremlin. There are a lot of terms that are preferred that, I mean, not tremendously a lot now in the modern world, but that have no units. I like biangle. It's a two-sided plane figure. There is no, you know, you can have an angle, but you can't, like a triangle is 3, a biangle would be 2, but there isn't any such thing, can't be. So those usually are concepts are originating in mysticism, and we know not to use those. The more interesting one are the wrong units. They got units all right, but they shouldn't be there in one concept. And that's what a package deal is. A package deal puts together in one concept things that are fundamentally different. What does that do to you? It's like putting together warring elements in a peace treaty. Can't you come up with something better than that, Binswanger? No, not off the top of my head. Well, let's go on and look at the two possible kinds of wrong units. False integration is the package deal. You integrate things that don't belong together, that can't be integrated. You attempt to integrate them. And false division. So let's take, you separate things that shouldn't be separated. Let's take false integration because the two of them really go together. Extremism is the classic one, right? You put together George Washington and Adolf Hitler because both of them were extreme. You put together extreme virtue and extreme vice because they're extreme. That's the degree is not a characteristic you can use. It's like the anti, well, I can't say anti-concept because that term is taken. It's the opposite of the principle of concept formation. The principle of concept formation says you put together things that are close in measurements as opposed to something that's far. So if they're similar, you put them together. Extremism says if they're real different, you put them together. If they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, that means you put them together and you leave out the middle. It's just mind-blowing. It was a concept introduced in the Goldwater campaign in the attempt to smear Goldwater. And you probably know Extremism or the Art of Smearing that Ayn Rand wrote, where she explained how this whole thing works. Let's see how we're doing. We got 10 minutes. I'm not sure how much we have to cover. Let's see if I can boil down false integration for you and package deal for you. You have to cut the chicken at its joints. If you make file folders to hold things that don't belong together, you sabotage your filing system. So false integration is like if you had a library and you put together in one shelf all the books that have an odd number of pages. And in another shelf, all the ones that have even number of pages. Or you said all the books that were printed in countries whose first letter was in the first part of the alphabet versus those later. You know, you would put together books that have nothing to do with each other. All the books that have more than 4 words in the title, and then all the books that have more than 5 words in the title and so forth. You would have a hash. You would defeat the purpose of categorization, right? And that's what a package deal does. It defeats the purpose of concept formation. False division is the same thing, only looked at from the standpoint of separating things that belong together. Rather than putting together things that don't belong together, it separates things that belong together. So the classic case of that is right wing is fascism, left wing is communism. There's not 10 cents worth of difference between communism and fascism. They're both totalitarian systems that crush the individual, destroy the economy, and kill everyone. One of them wears brown shirts, one of them wears black or red shirts. That's about the only difference. So false division is same thing in the library, just looked at from another perspective. We're going to put all the books with cloth covers over here, all the ones with plastic covers over here. You divide things on the basis of a non-essential. So the cure for the package deal of either kind, false integration or false division, is to get to essentials, to get to the fundamental, the rule of fundamentality that Ayn Rand emphasizes and comes from Aristotle. That's what makes your concepts work. That's what cutting the chicken at the joint means. Now, people will tell you it's all subjective. It's all conventional. There's no right and no wrong way to form your concepts, to define them. There's no such thing as a real fundamental. I mean, they don't even know about fundamentals. You can put anything with anything. Oh, really? Okay, suppose we have a science of biology, and instead of the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, we have the striped organism kingdom and the non-striped organism kingdom. So in the stripes, we put in certain snakes, but not other snakes, zebras, but not horses, and tiger lily plants, but not rhododendron. And in the other category, we have horses, snakes, plants, and then we subdivide it in some other way, like things that are bigger than a person. So there's stripes that are bigger than a person. You see, you could not have science. But that's the purpose of concepts, is to have science, to gain knowledge, to store knowledge, to be able to apply knowledge, to find causal connections, to advance, to specialize, to have a division of labor. It's the epistemological corollary, the cognitive corollary of merging businesses on the basis of non-essentials, which they used to do called conglomerates. So you take a company that makes nails and it merges with an advertising company. And then that merges with a software distribution company. And there's no economies of scale to be had from that. The reason why they did it in the 60s was that they wanted to expand, but the antitrust laws prevented them from making logical expansion. So if they wanted to expand, they had to prove that they were not integrating, because that was a bad thing. That's against the law. Those laws have been softened a little bit now, so we don't see conglomerates anymore. So the division of cognitive labor and the division of production labor both have to put together things that belong together, that are similar, that produce a synergy with each other. And if you don't, you got junk. Finally, and I think it's finally, we have anti-concepts. Anti-concepts are invalid concepts that are designed with an evil purpose, to wipe out a proper concept. They're like anti-missiles, designed to shoot down a missile. Anti-concept is a concept that tries to obliterate a valid concept. So they're necessarily new. They can't come up from ground zero, because first they have to have something they want to destroy. So first has to be a legitimate concept, then something comes in to eat it. Socialization is my favorite anti-concept. It just warms the cockles of my heart when I see socialization. Now, probably a lot of you use the term socialization from time to time casually. You're dealing in poison. There's nothing more destructive than to use the term socialization. You're better off putting capitalism in with fascism than this. Socialization is the theory that the child gets its values and way of operating mindlessly from social metaphysical copying of other people. The socialization process, you think of it as, well, the 2-year-old, when he comes to the dining table, he begins by just putting his hands in and throwing silverware and so on. But eventually, his parents condition him to use nice silverware in a nice way and to put his hands in and not to throw food. That's the socialization process. Even there, but certainly in more big issues than not throwing your food around, there's Rourke and there's Keating. And what this does is it makes Rourke impossible. It says everybody's Keating. That is, there are people who learn a proper form of behavior because they understand that it's proper, and there are people who just start imitating what other people know to be a proper form of behavior because they're second-handers. So socialization is aimed at destroying Rourke. It says there's no such thing as rational learning. It's all imitation. It's all mindless conformity. It says society gets into the brain of the little boy and the little girl and implants in them the customs and traditions of the society. Well, I don't think it did that to Rourke. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this is a really evil attempt to destroy the concept of independence and rational learning and substitute for it imitation. Ayn Rand lists many anti-concepts. Extremism, she decided later, is an anti-concept. There used to be this term isolationism. Polarization was one of the first ones that she named as an anti-concept. Some of these disappear because they either destroyed their target and are no longer needed, or they fail to destroy their concept, so they lose their punch. Homelessness is an anti-concept. What concept is it trying to destroy? Bum. There's only 2 reasons why a person would be homeless. One is they're insane, and some of them are tragically, mentally ill. And the other is they're immoral. There's no such condition. You notice that the homelessness and the homeless was never used until about 1975. It's not part of the language. You could be homeless after a flood, but you weren't the homeless. Like there's a class in society, the homeless. That's designed to destroy the concept of personal responsibility and freedom and rights. It's to destroy egoism and substitute altruism for it. So it's an anti-concept. We're just swimming in these today. I have now reached the end of my rope, so we will stop the class here, but we'll have a whole hour tomorrow for questions. Thank you very much.